Hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to For the Love of Comics. Today's episode was actually going to be very different from what it's ended up being. I thought I would do another top 10 video. I've done a couple of them already, which you can find linked in this playlist above and in the description below. And I thought I would add to that playlist by doing a video on my top 10 personal favorite single comics issues. This didn't eventually end up on the list, although it's an honorable mention, and I'll get into why a little bit later. But as soon as I decided that that's what I wanted to do a top 10 on, I ran into trouble. First of all, I made up a bunch of rules and parameters, because what's the point of making a top 10 list if you don't give yourself a whole bunch of rules? But then I still ended up with about 20 comics, and then I started making up arbitrary rules and other kinds of specialized things in order to exclude things to try to boil it down to a top 10, which then needed me to explain a whole bunch of parameters and way of thinking and have a lot of caveats before I could even get to the list. And then with the actual list, I wanted to talk in detail about each of the comics, surprise, surprise. So it would end up being literally a 2-hour episode, kind of all over the place. So that was out of control. So now I'm left with all these comics spread out in front of me, but I thought that maybe I could do something a little different. Instead of a top 10 video, I thought maybe I could make it into a series of videos, each video focusing on one particular comics issue that I really love, getting into why I love it, bit of analysis, spoilery and non-spoilery for all kinds of readers, and tell you where it can be found and collected. I think that would be a little more fun than me just listing comics, because like all lists, this is completely arbitrary and very subjective, and why I like something and what I appreciate about something, why I think it's one of the greatest things ever, is in many ways more important than what the thing is itself. Doing it like this would also allow me to get from you feedback on these episodes, what you're enjoying, what you'd like to see more of, and incorporate those into subsequent episodes, and also have a running discussion in which you let me know about single issues and standalone comics that I should be taking a look at. So what do you think? In that case, I'll take this episode to give you a few of the parameters and the logic that I'm following in selecting these titles, and have the first episode on the first comic follow shortly. So let me give you my parameters. For this top 10, I wanted to focus on issues of comics that could be more or less read standalone. By that I mean that the story was complete, so there would be a beginning, middle, and end that was satisfying for a reader coming in cold. And I also wanted to expand that idea of coming in cold to the idea of this issue working really well as an introduction to the series, which is to say that it would be great if it was not only a complete standalone good Spider-Man story, but also function in some ways as an introduction to Spider-Man, or could be the first Spider-Man story that someone's ever read. Now, this level of standaloneness means that a lot of my favorite issues from the point of view of the role they play in a larger story or in a larger mythology or in propelling a particular narrative forward were disqualified. Not that they weren't great issues, but that they really needed a before and after to get their full context and their full power, which could definitely be true for some of the issues that I have selected, but it's that additional level of being able to stand by itself if coming in cold that really gave these selections the edge, which is also why something like Swamp Thing 21 doesn't quite make the list but is only an honorable mention. It's because as path-breaking, groundbreaking, and phenomenal as this comic book is, and there's no doubt that it still operates within a larger context of what came before it and how it was revising that, and all of the drama and literary prowess in this one issue is really expanded upon in the issues that followed it. Similarly, Mind Management 21 by Matt Kindt is a virtuosic masterpiece of silent comic storytelling. But beyond the fact that you're reading a silent comic and the speech is affected a certain way, the real genius of this comic comes within the larger world of Mind Management, where the story is at that point of time, and the kind of situation that has created this particular environment. More than being just a gimmick, it works so well within the larger structure of this series that singling it out as a single issue, although completely deserving, won't actually be celebrating, much like Swamp Thing 21, the true role that this plays in the larger series. And the same thing could be said for Watchmen number 5, which is one of the most technically accomplished issues of one of the most technically accomplished series. Not just the mirror imagery, but the manner in which the story and an interrogation is woven together. All of it can be appreciated as a single read, but the real beauty and the power of this is again within the larger series, the development of the characters that we've been introduced to, the expansion of their world, as well as an expansion of the techniques that this series uses in its storytelling. There's no doubt that this, like the others, is a great comic, but it doesn't quite pass that hurdle of absolute standaloneness. The second parameter is I didn't include any issues of anthologies or anthology magazines. Now, although these do technically count as single issues of a continuing serial, the multiplicity of authorship and creators and the various styles and different stories all combined together makes it difficult to compare them to the kind of comics that have one or collaborating creators working on one or maybe two stories. Also, when you bunch up things together, you get a very uneven tone, which is not really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a single issue, because the single issue really is about the experience of reading that single issue, including the backup if it's something else, but it's one experience in a way that reading multiple things within a collected form isn't quite. Also, it's a little unfair because you could have an anthology that's full of fantastic creators, and so therefore you've just got 9 people versus 1 or 2. I think everyone has one of those friends that when you ask them what their favorite music album is, they name a greatest hits album. I mean, that's a cheat, and it's not really what we're talking about as album. So for the purposes of this, I'm not going to have any issues of multiple author anthologies. And the third parameter is probably the most arbitrary one. This list is limited not just by what I've read, but what I own in single issue form, which means that there are a number of great stories that I've only read in trade paperbacks or in collected editions, but if I haven't experienced it as a front cover to back cover single issue, I'm not going to be including it on this list. What makes this particularly unfair is that I don't really have a very large collection of single issues. Most of my collection, if you've been watching the videos on my shelves, tend to be collected editions, tend to be, what's called graphic novels, full stories, or serialized volumes that are bound together instead of the 32 or 64 page issue that I'm talking about here. This obviously throws a whole bunch of probably your favorites out of contention, but the point of this list is really the books that I have found to be the most personally affecting experiences of reading cover to cover. So there are some fantastic issues from series like Fables and Transmetropolitan, 2 Vertigo series straight off the top of my head, that I know would make it onto the list if I had only read them in single issue form. However, depending on how long this series goes on, I'm perfectly capable of purchasing an issue simply to make a video on it. So those are the 3 big parameters. There are some smaller ones that I will get to when I talk about the individual comics themselves, or what gave them the edge over something else, or what makes them particularly great. As I said, my first video on the first comic will be out very soon, and for those of you who stuck around so far, I will give you a peek. It's going to be Animal Man number 5, written by Grant Morrison and with art by Chaz Truog and Doug Hazelwood. So that's coming up very soon. Keep your eyes peeled, watch this space, and I'll see you at that next video.